I'm Mindy.
I'm Matt.
Oh, that's not working. There we go. So we have a few learning objectives for today. We're going to define poverty and disabilities, discuss how they align together and how they impact each other, learn how to support students who have a disability and that are in poverty, and then how to collaborate with each other. We realize that a lot of this is just kind of brushing the surface here, but we really want to just provide some strategies and some information about how poverty in rural areas affects students with disabilities and their transition outcomes. There's us again, even though you get to see us on the camera.
Y'all want to see us a bunch today.
So to begin with, it's really interesting because when I think of poverty, I really associate that with social economic status. Having worked in San Antonio and being a very large city, I've seen a lot of that, and you could probably point out different areas within the city, that are well off, and we think of that SES. But the U.S. Department of Education has some other definitions for poverty as well that we'll go through. And I like how it talks about, these different experiences, knowledge, confidence, opportunities, all affect that educational level. So let's go to the next slide. So the first one that we have is that generational poverty. So several things that can be noted by it. It seems like, these are the families, and I think this could be affected by the rural maybe the most, is that generational, where they just stay in that same area over several years and lifetimes with these families. Maybe they have never owned land, they don't have maybe the best education, or maybe they're having to stay within the family to help support them with their economic status. And so this may be a family that we come in contact with, especially in those rural areas. So another one, we can go to the next slide.
Hang on for a moment. If you're, somebody needs to find them. Okay, there we go.
Find them. Okay.
So this next poverty that the U.S. Department of Education talks about, it's working class poverty. And so this is where families may not have a lot of extra money to go out and do extracurricular activities. I've known families to where they just live within probably 4 blocks of their house, because that's where all their family lives. There's a couple of houses right around there. Aunts, uncles all live right there. I've heard of other educator talk about this, where she took these students across town to the zoo, and this was the first time this 3rd, 4th grader had ever been to the zoo, even though fairly small town, not as much going on, and they just don't have this extra money to go and do these things. More than likely, they're living paycheck to paycheck. Healthcare is a big issue at this point. And so we can kind of define that by looking at it between 2 weeks to a month from that paycheck to paycheck. If we can go to the next slide. We've got people that are more immigrant, and these have no resources. They may be coming in maybe as refugees. We've seen that quite a bit in the recent years here with lots of wars going on, people moving in looking for maybe asylum here in the United States. And with that, then they face that language and cultural barriers. And so they're not able to access the different resources available to them because of those barriers. And it's different because they look at it as a systematic problem and not necessarily them being poor, but it's just that access to these resources that they're not able to gain. So if we can go to the next slide. This is the last one that the U.S. Department of Education talk about, this situational poverty. And so I've had students that have had a health crisis, whether it's them or whether it's a family member, that this really drains their resources from the family, and this devotes a lot more time and energy into helping sustain them. And so school, or kids, they may be coming in, they don't have new clothes maybe at the beginning of the school year because something's happened over the summer, and they just need some time to recruit those resources and maybe tap into those different agencies for a bit of time to get back to where they were. And these people, like it says at the end, they can be pretty harsh judge of those in poverty because they never thought they would be in poverty. Being in the middle class, they're doing pretty good. Yet when this hard time hits, then they have a problem with maybe that pride or sense of, accepting help for a little bit of time. And so these are families that we also need to look at, if they've had these maybe divorce or health issues, that we can talk to them in a way that maybe can help them through this time of need. So the next slide. I know I have definitely experienced having kids with a disability and then their families being in poverty. And it could be any one of these poverties like we just discussed. And so thinking about how we can be ready with these resources to give to these students and these families to help support them through maybe the short time period that they may need, or maybe at a longer goal, and setting that up for them to use these resources and being able to then get out of poverty. But as we'll see in the next coming slides with a lot of the literature, more than likely you'll have a very good chance to have these two, disability and poverty, collide and come about in your schools.
Hey, Matt, really quick, I wanted to tell everyone, it was on the email, but we are monitoring the chat. So if anybody wants to ask questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be sure to address it during our presentation. So sorry to interrupt.
Oh, thank you, Mindy. So this is just some statistics that we found. 13.7% of all Americans live in poverty. And this is a big portion, almost 20% of the age 18 or younger have been in poverty at some point. And it's looking at this regional poverty rates. It's interesting because when you have different departments, different systems, they look and distinguish parts of the United States differently. But Oklahoma is that we're defined as that South regional area. And so looking in that, there's about 12.8% of the population being in poverty here in Oklahoma. So the next slide. This is one that I found quite interesting in that 50 million school-age children are in the United States. And then with looking at the Department of Education statistics, 6.6 million receive services under IDA. And so there is a little bit, that last bullet, a possible 1.2 million of these children live in poverty, that is not directly from the U.S. Department of Education. What I did was took the numbers from the previous slide and then took that 6.6 million and divided it. And so that's where we get the possible 1.2 million children living in poverty. So that isn't specifically from the U.S. Department of Education. That's just a number that we're able to kind of look at. And it's kind of staggering to me that our children that are under IDEA, over 1 million of them, more than likely, are going to meet this intersection of having poverty in their life. And so it makes it more keen for us to be aware of the impact that poverty has. So the next slide.
Matt, I'd also like to point out, Mallory, looking it up, and most of Oklahoma is considered rural. We have the big pockets towards Oklahoma City and Tulsa, and then down south a little bit, but for the most part, all of this stuff is going to apply to the majority of Oklahoma that we're going to be talking about, because the rural impacts us so greatly. And I think in the South, it's like that a lot where we live, but I just wanted to point that out for our participants.
Thank you, Mindy. So some other information that we found specifically for adult outcomes, you know, those with a disability half as likely to have employment, twice as likely to live in poverty compared to their working age peers. I've seen that with my graduates, having worked at a high school. 2 of the 3 students that I've worked with specifically, they don't have jobs. Keeping up with them on Facebook and such, they're not, or if they do, they're going to be underemployed. They're just going to be working those minimal jobs like at Walmart or maybe Ross, you know, stocking, and that's about it. So the next slide. So we can see that there's a great website, disabilitystatistics.org, that you can go to and look at, find some good numbers for. So that 26.6% of adults with the disabilities in 21 to 64 are in one of those poverty areas as well. Thinking about what the U.S. government considers poverty and that threshold in 2017, which was the most recent data that we could find when we put this together, was 24,858. And so just within 7 years, they've increased that threshold just by a little over $2,500. And so this is a family with 2 parents, 2 kids, and then that's what they're considered at that poverty level.
That seems so low to me.
Matt, do you remember what the statistics for individuals 21 to 64 living in poverty? Wasn't it like 12 or 13% overall? The number of adults with disabilities was 26.6%. So I think you see the inflation of that number and how it increases when adults do have disabilities, and how it increases that number that live in poverty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't remember the other number that we had looked at.
I think it was almost double.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah,
I can go back and look it up.
So we can see from the literature, students with disabilities have lower graduation rates, post-secondary enrollment isn't as well. Transition planning and parent involvement isn't coming together compared to their typical counterparts, especially those living with diverse cultures as well. They tend to have that special or a higher special education referral rate. And so this all comes together and helps us understand these students and how we should just be keeping maybe a little bit more of an eye out to support them in what their needs are.
14% was the poverty rate. Sorry.
14%. Okay. 14 to 26.
This is something that I found really interesting, that when you have a family and within that family a child has a disability, mothers tend to stay at home. They tend to, work specifically with their kids. And so that means that's not another income for that family to support them. Or they may not be able to take advancements within their jobs because of maybe time restrictions that they have to have with getting home and taking care of the child after school and such. And so this never really hit me until I read it, that having a child with a disability can really influence the parents and how they structure their lives and how they support their work and support their family. I know I work with the deaf ed population specifically, and I've talked to one family, and I know they moved, they were living in Canada, and they moved specifically to Kansas because of their son being deaf. And that's one of the better schools for the deaf, Kansas School for the Deaf. And so the whole family uprooted for the support of the child. And so that could definitely impact parents and how they find work and can continue to progress in their work. So the next slide. Quite often there's financial burdens for the family, depending on insurance and what the family has. They may have out-of-pocket medical services or equipment, dietary care that's specific for the child. And these all can play a part of putting that family into that poverty, one of those poverty categories. And we found that also that the family has a person with a disability are more likely to be involved with food insecurity, maybe participate in SNAP and other agencies or resources that provide things like that to support them. So with time constraints, we left these let's share slides in the PowerPoint just to give you some food for thought. And if we have some time, we're going to discuss more. But these are some questions that we would like you to think of maybe during the presentation. Maybe you have some experiences that you have that you can share towards the end when we take more questions. But we thought these were good thought-provoking things for individuals to look at and to think of when looking at disability and poverty together.
So we have a few strategies to help. So as educational stakeholders, I know that we have more than just secondary educators or elementary educators on here, but we also have transition specialists and those in higher ed that can share with their pre-service and in-service teachers. So these were a few suggestions that we found from the literature. Was teaching self-determination, and we will get into that in just a little bit. And then we also have professional development, but providing it in a way that you're educating and demonstrating. So going a step beyond just giving a bunch of information out, but actually teaching parents and teaching students and teaching other teachers how to use the information that you're giving them. Then we also have involving families and collaborating with outside agencies. So teaching self-determination, I'm going to define self-determination really quick. As an elementary special educator, self-determination was something that was new to me, and I wasn't quite familiar with the definitions. And maybe I had an idea of what it was and used some of it in my classroom, but I didn't do it very meaningfully. So self-determination is a set of skills that includes choice-making, problem-solving, goal setting and attainment, self-advocacy, self-awareness and disability awareness, and involvement in the IEP. And it is a lifelong process that students start interacting with when they are very young. They've even said infants can show some self-determination skills when they are persistent in wanting to be fed, wanting to be held, when they're crying, they're expressing something, a choice or something that they want. All the way up through late adulthood, you're still making choices, you're still solving problems and goal setting. So self-determination is a lifelong skill that you interact with at different times in your life. And so it's not just for secondary students, but these self-determination skills help propel students in high school and in elementary school. It helps them to obtain these better outcomes when they leave high school. And it even helps them to do better in their academic skills. So some suggestions to help teach self-determination. We have setting up in classrooms that provide stimulating environments, having a lot of choices. Here's my little soapbox here. So I have a kindergarten student, and often when she's being passed out materials like a crayon or something, she's told, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. And my whole thing is that kindergarten student may not have very many opportunities that they can actually make a choice. So providing that one little opportunity to make a choice helps that student to build self-determination skills. So if a student chooses the green crayon that one time, that next time they can realize they can start to understand, well, I didn't really like writing in green. I'd rather use blue. So they're practicing some problem solving in there as well. So setting up a classroom that allows students to make choices and to problem solve. And that includes when students get older, deciding on how they're going to learn information and how they're going to interact with information. So for high school students, having a choice of which materials they're going to interact with that day, which one they're going to do first, which one they're going to do last. That also helps with behavior issues as well. And we realize that this opportunity to express self-determination may not happen in schools that have lower incomes. And so it would be very important for educators to be very meaningful in setting up these environments. I know as an educator, I provided a lot of opportunities for students to engage with self-determination skills, but I wasn't very meaningful about it. And so there would be maybe some missed opportunities that I had. So just being mindful that we can set up environments to increase self-determination skills for students.
I also think in the rural areas, it's harder for teachers to focus on that self-determination because they're wearing so many hats. And so it's something they have to make a conscious effort. And I'm not saying it's easy. I know they have a lot of different jobs they're doing, but it's something they really need to focus on, is trying to implement that self-determination. And it doesn't just have to be at the secondary level, like Malarie said. It's taking it and implementing it throughout everything with all of your students of all ages. Because I know some rural teachers that teach K through 12 special ed. So I know it's not easy, but it is something teachers need to put as a focus of their curriculum.
As well, I have 6 kids, and so I have one, I remember Briarly at 14 months, who I was giving cereal to in the morning, and she told me no. And I was like, what? What's going on? And so I figured, I was like, oh, maybe she doesn't want this cereal. And I asked, do you want another cereal? And she actually went over and pointed to the cereal she wanted. And I was thinking, the sugar content's the same in all these cereals. What's the difference? Let her have a choice in this. And this is something that I think teachers can pass on to the parents at whatever age, right? Using the self-determination. You can probably see that all 3 of us are very involved in self-determination since we're all speaking up at this area.
So there are some curriculums that can help encourage and increase self-determination skills for students. And we've listed them here. They are free on the Zero Center website or through the Beach Center, which is through KU. So there are some options in providing these materials and curriculums that are free for teachers. And for those teachers who do teach K through 12 that are in these rural areas, this may be something that you have to pass along to general educators. And some of these things in here are not just specific to students with disabilities, but that they can be taught to all students, and that would help their students who are in poverty that don't have disabilities, or just help their students that are in their classrooms in the rural areas to really access and interact with self-determination skills and providing those opportunities. So this is a long list and we don't have time to go through it, but I am going to put a little plug here. We have your email addresses, and so we can send it out, but we have some trainings that are coming up across the state of Oklahoma, and they will really get into some of these materials. So if you're not in Oklahoma, I'm sorry. You could probably still attend in some sense if you're close enough to the border, but to really go through these skills and these lesson packages. But I will touch on the Me lessons for teaching self-awareness and self-advocacy. They're very popular. They do take about 20 hours to implement.
Yeah, I think it's about 20 hours.
So sometimes that can be time consuming. So there are transition bell ringers that focus on self-awareness and self-advocacy that take about 10 minutes, and you'll see that's farther down on the list. But they are all available on our website, and they give the students an opportunity to think about how they might self-advocate for themselves, and actually knowing what self-advocating is and what it looks like. So it just provides that opportunity for teachers to do it meaningfully.
And I'll say something as a secondary teacher. I think the biggest difference I used those lessons, and I did the transition bell ringers and all of that stuff, and it didn't impact my classroom. But the biggest thing I did as a case manager for self-determination was the student-led IEPs. You don't necessarily have to follow the curriculum. You can kind of detail it and design it and make it how it works with your student and your students in your caseload. And that is the biggest thing I show to impact. And that's just my opinion. I didn't take any data on it, so it's hard for me to tell you that, but that's my opinion, that was the biggest thing to impact self-determination.
So Carrie made a comment about, choices and how some students don't have the choice because of their scheduling and the medicine they have to take. And it's so true. Letting them have those little choices will really build them up.
Thanks, Carrie, for bringing that up. Okay, so we were going to have that opportunity to share, and I'm not sure that we will right now, but as we're going through this PowerPoint, maybe reflect on some of your practices that you have done in the past and maybe not have done so intentionally, but that you could in the future, about providing those stimulating environments for students. Or like Carrie brought up, giving students a choice in how their daily routine goes. And how can students decide on instruction? When students get to high school and through the ICAPS, which is for all students here in Oklahoma, and also the transition planning for students with disabilities, they have the opportunity to have a course of study and getting to decide on what courses they're going to take. And so that kind of lets them direct what instruction they will be receiving as well. And then, go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
I'm sorry. I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
And then also to think about what other resources are out there to teach self-determination. I know that there are several trauma-informed practices that go along with self-determination skills. And so while they may not explicitly state that they're to build self-determination skills, they focus on that set of skills that represent self-determination. So as teachers, you may be more aware of what is out there right now that will help your students to build self-determination skills. Maybe those social emotional learning curriculums really build on those self-determination skills. And so whatever way that you choose or what fits into your day the best to teach those self-determination skills intentionally.
And I would like Jen Randall to please explain choices over options. I saw your post, and I'd like you to elaborate on that. Are you still there?
Sorry, yeah,
No, I'm sorry.
doing about 1,000 different things right now, trying to listen.
Didn't mean to call you. Sorry, I was just curious.
No, sometimes I think that we forget about real choices and making it meaningful, and just throwing things out like, you can do this or this, which they're kind of options, but they're not real choice. And so I still struggle with trying to make sure, is that something, is this a real choice that they want that's viable, or is it just things we're just throwing out there? So.
Yeah.
Great. Yes.
When I'm trying to get my 12-year-old son to actually take a shower, it's like, take a shower, mow the lawn. That's not really choices. Just
suggestions.
Right. And those are kind of options, but just to make sure.
Thank you, Jen.
So for teachers who are in these rural areas and you do a variety of things and you wear several different hats, you are the elementary educator as well as a secondary educator for special education, there may be this option of teaching your fellow educators on how to focus on students with disabilities and those from poverty, whether it's using those self-determination curriculums that we discussed, but it also could be as easy as showing them how to fill out a transition assessment and how they can give those transition assessments and use those results. So you could also include community resources and inviting experts from the field to educate other professionals in your school. You just don't know until you know. And so as a special educator, you may have an area that you feel that your school needs that maybe other people in your school don't understand or haven't even thought of. So you could bring that person from the field, the expert from the field, to educate your people at the school and yourself as well. And the community resources is interesting too. And I've seen this done in several ways with like mapping out your community, just looking for resources. Sometimes we don't realize there might be a gym that's just right down the street that we could, I say gym as GEM, GYM, though that might work too. that would provide several resources for your students that maybe you hadn't thought of before. I mentioned this earlier, but the professional development should go beyond this, just providing and throwing up information at people, but also to demonstrate. So providing training on transition assessments. as a case manager, you may see some students with mild to moderate disabilities maybe once every month, or maybe even less. You're just consulting with the teacher. And so you may not be, as a secondary special educator, the right person to fill out that transition assessment because you don't see that student day to day. So asking general educators to fill out that transition assessment might be really important, but there's ways that you could show them how to provide more information, and then also how to use that information in their classroom. Past creating goals for them, but how they can actually use learning and lessons, learning activities and lessons in your classroom to help influence and help students to meet those goals. And also there's this troubleshooting as well, and we run into that a lot here at the Zero Center we provide a bunch of information and then we don't actually have students or teachers use the information or the things that we're providing, and then they end up not working. So just providing the opportunity for students and other teachers and other people and coworkers to actually use those materials that you're providing to them so that they can ask questions and you can troubleshoot the results.
Well, I think when you're doing professional development so many times, you are just inundated with information. There's so much they're giving you. So actually breaking it up and doing like the educate and demonstrate, it allows people to actually process it and benefit from it, because I just got back from a training in Reno. It was one of the best trainings I went to, and the whole time I'm like, this is amazing, this is amazing. And I try to take notes, but I'm so overwhelmed when I got back that I don't even remember half the stuff, and it makes me really sad. So I think when it's a possibility to do that, educate and demonstrate, and not trying to do another shameless plug, but I really think that's what's important about the trainings that are going on about all the transition stuff lately, is they're breaking them up so you have time for that educate and demonstrate. And, people can share it with their colleagues.
Reach out to your state departments too, as far as the professionals in the field. Sometimes the state departments will provide free trainings if you just ask for it and be very specific on what you want. They will send some people out to help out and train your teachers on that material. Here's some just other suggestions. If you're going to use the SDLMI or the transition bell ringers, actually run the lesson with participants to show them how it goes and model best practice and have them practice with each other as well. We know with our students, when we teach them a skill, it's really important that they're practicing that skill and even teaching another student how to use that skill. So we need to use the same practices that we use with our students with adults too. So role playing provides that opportunity as well. So here are some suggestions on maybe some things that we could talk about at the end, or maybe things to reflect on as we go through. Think about the professional development sessions that you've attended in the past and maybe how they've helped you, or maybe how you needed more information from them to be able to use the materials or the information that they provided. Also think about some topics that you would like to see for professional development. Maybe there is an expert in that field and you just need to ask the State Department or ask somebody your colleague to help you brainstorm some ideas of who can come and help and provide information on that topic. And then how have you demonstrated some of this information to parents? And in the next few slides, we'll really talk about how you can involve families in the transition process and how that helps students with disabilities and those from poverty backgrounds and those in rural areas to help them propel them into their post-secondary goals and aspirations.
Okay, so I'm going to touch upon the family involvement, and that's such a key factor, especially when we're looking at overall transition, we're looking at poverty, and we're looking at rural areas. This family involvement is huge, and all the literature we pulled up, it went back to not only just training educators in that professional development, but also this family involvement component. And while all of it's important, I think to be able to get this transition component in, the family plays that huge key role. So we're going to share a few things, and like we said earlier, please feel free to share stuff on the chat. We've gotten some great ideas what other people are doing, and we're going to share them all at the end. So Ways you can build family involvement is have fun nights, not just always make it about school. And I know sometimes that might seem hard because we're asking so much of families to come up for this and that. But I think if we set the tone early with fun things to come up, that sometimes that makes parents a little bit more willing to come up. And especially if we make them fun, the kids are more willing to come up. And I don't know about you guys, but when my kid wants to go up to the school, it's really hard to tell him no, because he's wanting to go do something at the school that's fun, and he will hail me. And I always try to find other plans. But I mean, he loves the bingo night, and he loves to do all that. And once I get there, I love it, and I realize how important it is. So it's just taking that step to do it. So make it fun. Make a resource fair. Do a movie and picnic. I've heard of some other schools that will actually bring in some therapy dogs. And so the kids all want to come see the therapy dogs, but it also gets the family into the school. This is really important to start because you need that early positive and ongoing communication, and setting that up as early as possible is a key. Class Dojo, I don't know if anyone's using that, but it's phenomenal. This is the first year I've had a teacher use it with my child, and it's been great. And I'm one of those parents that I have a pile on my dining room table that we never eat at. I have one little pile with all the important paperwork. Well, it never fails. I blame my husband. He blames me. Someone throws the paperwork away. And that Class Dojo, I just have to use it all the time to look back and see when stuff's due or what's going on, or just that they had a great day, or if something happened at school that day, like they had a teacher get diagnosed with cancer a few weeks ago, and they just reached out to us on Class Dojo just to keep us informed. And I really respected the teachers for that, so we knew what was going on and how to talk to our kids. The communication folders could always be really important. And I know sometimes in poverty, maybe the access to internet isn't what most of us in the more metro areas are used to, or I shouldn't even say metro, but I had several students that did not have access to internet while I was teaching. So that's something that communication folders can help counteract that. Parent universities, we did this when I was with more public schools, and it was a huge success. For the most part, some years we may only have a few parents, and then some years we'd have a lot. But it's important we did something every quarter. Sometimes it was every month, and some years it was every quarter. And we invited parents to come up, and we had special nights, and they were all dedicated to transition. Some of them might be a resource fair. Others might be a student panel of about self-advocacy. We might have just a college night. We might have a community agencies night. It always changed a little bit. So, and it really seemed to benefit the parents. And when we would get them up there, they had so many great ideas, and they were always very complimentary of what we did. I really like this DRS counselor night. We're going to focus on that in a little bit later too. So we'll come back to that. And then career fairs, which are pretty self-explanatory, but I think it's a really good idea to do it for family involvement, because we do them for the students, but we don't always think about doing it for the family too.
And with the career fairs, in rural areas, sometimes there's not a lot of options. And so having people that are in a certain mile radius of your school, whether it's 10 or 20 miles, and having individuals and employers and professionals in those areas to come in and talk at those career fairs to help them make the connection to their own area right at that moment, and not necessarily something that's off in the distance.
Mm-hmm. So encourage that parent involvement. And it's important with that parent involvement, you're working on the work-related skills and the behaviors through all grades, and you take those transition skills you're working on, have the parents work on them. It doesn't all have to fall at the hands of the teacher. Have the students work with budgeting. Budgeting is something that any family can benefit from, and especially, if they're living in poverty, that's something that they might be really conscious of, and that's something that the kids can help and understand what is going on with money. Then always providing documentation and progress to those families, keep them involved. That makes them feel like there's an importance of them knowing that information. I always look forward to, when I get my son's any progress reports he gets or anything like that, like just setting that tone with the family, setting joint goals, be sure the families are involved in those goals. I think as a teacher, we always think we know best and we can see what the kids need, but you really have to consider what the family wants as well. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. Provide possible employment resources and opportunities for the family. This is huge for family involvement. You have to be aware of the family's culture and belief, and respect the goals for their kids. I think a lot of us come from middle-class backgrounds where we have a pretty set idea of what life after school should look like and what all of our kids are capable of, and that everyone's capable of work and everyone's capable of training. But while we value that, that's not what all cultures value. And it's important for us to talk with those families and be sure we are setting the student up for realistic goals that applies to them, not that applies to us and our preconceived notions. And that's really hard to get over yourself sometimes, because as a teacher, I always felt like I just knew best. And sometimes I still do, according to my husband. But it is important to consider that culture and understand that it is different than ours. And I think even in our rural areas, we are changing so much culture-wise in Oklahoma. It seems to be changing all the time, that we're being presented with more and more cultures, and it's really important for us to maintain that focus. And provide a comfortable environment for an IEP training, and ongoing communication for parents. And just going back a little bit, the most comfortable IEPs I ever had, and the parents attended and loved, were the student-led IEPs. So it was huge, and it really changed that whole atmosphere of the IEP meeting. And I don't think I ever had a parent miss if they knew their kids were doing the IEP meeting. You want to go to the next slide?
Kimberly brought up a really good point on the chat. So she said, many of the rural families believe that if a child gets a job, they will lose their check. We need to educate parents that they only lose little in comparison to what the child gains from employment. And that's absolutely true. When we send out a farewell email, we'll provide some resources that we have here in Oklahoma as far as educating families. We have some resources that will help walk parents through that process of having their disability, Social Security checks, and as well as having employment. There are some resources that help families to bridge that, and how they can work together and still receive their money and still have their child work. Sorry, a little extra there.
That's a really good point. And then, so foster the good relationship, provide education and training for parents to aid in navigating the transition planning process. I was a first generation college student in my family. It was all new to my mom, and it was very overwhelming. And I think sometimes people shy away from doing something new because they're scared or they're uncomfortable with the process. And as silly as this sounds to me, like I want somebody to try and do it, but that might be a teacher. I mean, we have some parents that don't want to come across looking dumb, or they don't want to come across looking inferior because they don't know something. Well, we would never think that. But I just know, dealing with some parents in the past, they were intimidated sometimes just to try. And I think if we make that transition for them as easy as possible and provide them as much information. And then educational leaders, they need to establish those expectations of active family involvement. I think if you word it like, please come see us, maybe they feel like they have more of a choice, and not to take away their self-determination or anything. But I think if we really just kind of make it an expectation, be here, come for this, like let them know from the time they're starting in your school, this is your expectation. And I think it's important to reward those families too. I mean, reinforce them, let them know that it's important that they're there. We've worked with some people in the past where we provided meals to families that came, like we might get, or gift cards, work with your community, get your community involved, and providing some reinforcement for those families that are coming, or rewards.
On the chat, we had some discussion about how parents and families can access the internet if they don't have it at home. That's free, and with some really great options. So coffee shops, car dealerships, restaurants, colleges, universities, public libraries.
McDonald's. I've been at the lake and had to go use the internet at McDonald's.
Yes, so really great options there too. Sometimes the casinos might have free access to internet too. For rural Oklahoma, I know there's usually a casino not too far away, and so they might provide that free access to internet as well.
No, what did we say? Libraries?
Yes,
Yeah.
libraries, yes.
Okay, I thought this was really important. The FAFSA, we saw a whole article on this, and it's something that never really dawned on me, but provide training to these families. Have nights, because they may not have computers. They may be accessing everything from their phone. And I don't know if they do have internet. I don't know how hard it is for you guys, but for me to try to fill out something major on my phone, it's next to impossible, especially since I just had to get readers last week. That was a little worrisome for me, but it's hard. It's, we need to allow them to have the resources. And so providing these trainings, allowing them to come to the school, maybe reserving a computer lab and sitting down and teaching them how to do the FAFSA could be really change the dynamics of them feeling comfortable and them coming to you too for more in the future. But I've had a lot of students, their parents, they weren't going to touch FAFSA at all. And we had to sit down and plan it out. And it was really hard to get all that done with my student when I wasn't a parent and I didn't know the information.
Yeah, to fill out the FAFSA, sorry. You had to have income information about the past couple of years. And so that may not be readily accessible either. And so helping parents to find where they can get a copy of that information if they don't have it still, or allowing them to log into the free tax software that maybe they used. That's what I use, the free software. So there is a way to get that information so that they can have them side by side to fill out that application for students to go to.
And I think FAFSA now you can relate it back, like you can put in some information and it'll pull up your
Go ahead and pull it up. Yeah.
But you have to have that information.
And students may not have that on their own. And so having those family nights for them all to come do it at the same time and ask questions, because that takes a really long time to fill that out and it's difficult.
We have about 10 minutes, so we're going to go on. There's some when you're talking about those trainings for families, show them how to apply for a college, apply for scholarships, research other funding sources. It's important to let parents know what's out there for them. And the more information you give them, the better. And I'll tell you guys, if you just set this expectation, and I know it seems like a lot, teaching a parent how to apply for scholarships or creating research for funding sources, creating all this information for parents, you have to do it once, then just update it every year and send it out. It's not as much work as you think it's going to be. From doing the parent universities and all of that, it goes a lot quicker than you think, and it actually makes your job a little bit easier when you're doing it all together and saves you time. Okay, also explain the post-secondary education option for parents. They don't always know. Most of you guys know that technical schools, apprenticeships, think college, 2 or 4 year colleges, and on our email that we send out, we have some links for apprenticeships and the Think College website, so we'll send those out to you. So you can go into that a little bit further. This is what we talked about a little bit earlier, just the how to do brochures and make videos for the parents. That stuff you can create on your own, especially in the rural areas if it's harder for them to get to you or maybe they're working. Create stuff that you can send home. Okay, so now we're going to touch on the interagency collaboration, which I think is important. And interagency collaboration is where we're teaching them how to access those resources. We focus on interagency collaboration as educators, but we're also showing the parents and students how to make those connections. So help the students and the families learn the school staff that needs to help the students, then identify their post-school goal placements, transition to the placement, coordinated supports for the placement. So here's an example Matt did for us earlier. USAO. So the students interested in going to USAO. It's Caitlin Perry is the resource coordinator and Kathy Perrell-Neal at the Wentz Center for Neurodiversity Autism. And they've set up a meeting to meet with that person. And it's something that simple, like as a teacher, you can set that up and help. or just facilitate it with the student. If we go to the next slide.
Well, and something else is the Sooner Works now at OU. It
Oh,
could
yeah.
be easily replaced, right? And things like that.
I'm a little partial to that program. I like it. And we can send information out for that. And it's our program at OU for students with intellectual disabilities. It's an on-campus program, and they also have one in Tahlequah at NSU now too. So I think another thing, interagency collaboration, is DRS is a great resource. And Malarie and I were actually just talking about it before we did our webinar. And it's really shocking how many schools don't take advantage of DRS. Every school has a DRS counselor, right? And it's a matter, they have somebody that should be meeting with them, but there's also a lot of services DRS provides that schools don't take advantage of. And some of them we had DRS collaborated with us for so many things. Oh, next week's webinar is all about DRS, so perfect.
Oh, and she put the information in a link. Awesome.
And DRS is an amazing resource. We just to give you an idea, I know next week we'll probably go into it more, but when I was in Moore, we paired with DRS on a lot of stuff, but the coolest thing I think we did is the paid employment for kids on campus through DRS, because my kids couldn't get out and access employment necessarily all the time, and Moore doesn't have public transportation or anything like that. So we did a lot of partnershiping with DRS, and like we had students placed in our library. We had students as trainers, things like that, working within the school. So, and you could be creative. Like it doesn't have to always be through DRS. If you can't get that connection, you could always start with kids, just helping with laundry, car detailing, teacher's aid, coffee shop, things like that on your campus.
And that helps for rural schools because you're not maybe able to access those things outside of the school. Your school may be your main business.
Okay, so we kind of did this. We've already gone over all this, but for the interagency collaboration, when we're focusing more on that with the parent piece, is whole parent informative nights. We've already talked about that, and make handouts, but also be sure those handouts aren't just about transition, but you're also providing agency supports. Make sure you get that information to parents. Sometimes we are the only connection for parents, especially with your students. I feel like with more mild needs, they're not getting that information. So it's really important for us to be that go-between for them. Target students, I think it's important that, especially with our population of disabilities and poverty, both are at a higher risk for dropping out. And then when you combine the two, it's even more pronounced. So I think if you kind of, as a teacher or even as a school system, you do that multi-tiered approach of really giving more targeted interventions to the students that you see are at a higher level, what's the right risk? Thank you. I don't know
dropping
what
out.
there.
Yeah.
Risk of dropping out. So I think if we use that multi-tiered approach. Okay, I think we've hit the end of the PowerPoint. We have 5 minutes left, and we have some really good things that people have shared. And I think we want to really talk about as experienced educators. Do you have anything you would like to share with us, which you haven't already done on the chat? If you want to speak up, guys, you can unmute your microphones. If anyone has anything to say. If not, you can also put it in the chat, and I'll be checking that out.
So Kimberly said earlier at the 10:06 mark how she brings in community speakers, the different employers, to talk to her students about what they do, the importance of social media and how it can affect job chances, and it really tailoring those people coming in to the interests of the students.
Oh, somebody else said Votex for internet access. Wonderful. Yes, every Votex I've been to had free internet access. So it's been really nice.
I like all those ideas. Okay.
Oh. Yeah, so accessing WIOA funds, I think that was on one of the last time you've checked into that. And just asking your counselors, your DRS counselors, and for more information on that and what that can provide to your students.
And I think it's important for you guys to be educated on DRS, because I don't think it's always, schools are always aware of all the possibilities there are, all the possibilities of collaboration with DRS and the benefits for our students. So I'd highly encourage you guys to participate in that webinar next week, and encourage other teachers to do it as well. I think that one will be really beneficial.
I also think with the new, here in Oklahoma, the individual career academic plans, the new ICAP, will probably start to provide some opportunities, not only for all students, but, you know, really specific to those students in those rural areas and those students with disabilities. They're getting a little extra help outside their transition plans to make those connections and interactions with career possibilities and employment experiences.
A lot of times the DRS have summer camps as well. So hopefully that would be something people can take advantage of. They've got the working in the Wichitas. I know for deaf and hard of hearing students, we're going to have one at OU this summer. There's the Youth Leadership Forum, different things like that. So hopefully communities can support these students and send them to these camps during the summer.
So in our farewell email, I'm just going to recap of what we're going to provide out. There are some trainings here in Oklahoma we'll provide information on. We'll provide information on OWIPA, which is that connection between disability and Social Security information and employment. And so they will really be able to help out for that information. And then we'll also provide the different websites that we've talked about today and how you can use that information. We'll provide some information on Sooner Works, and then the OTC evaluation as well will go out on that.
Is there anything else? Thank you guys, and thank you for all your input. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been great, guys.
Good.
Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, you three, for being here and sharing the information. It's been really good, and love the interaction and engagement from all our attendees. It's been awesome.
Yeah.
I posted the survey link that we use for just to get information from you guys to know what we need to maybe offer for next webinars. So if you guys can just take a moment and just do this really quickly. You'll put an email in there, and that's the email that I will send, and it's a certificate of attendance. So, and as I had put, and they had mentioned earlier, next week's webinar will be 9:30 to 10:30 on Wednesday, and it is an overview of the Department of Rehab Transition Services. And that will be done by Renee Sanson and Brandy Hurley. So don't forget to register, and we will see you all next week. So, and I'll thank you guys.
Welcome. Thanks, Jim.
Bye, guys.